Okay, thank you very much, Darja, for joining us in this conference. Now, Spanish to the rest of the people to just to introduce you. Buenas tardes a todos. Estamos en una serie de conferencias que estamos organizando desde el Instituto de Desarrollo Local de la Universidad de Valencia. Y hoy contamos con la presencia de tres profesoras. Vamos a empezar con la profesora Darja, que es profesora en la Universidad de Southampton, en el Reino Unido, profesora en el Departamento de Geografía Humana. Y quería comentaros que ella ha realizado varios trabajos muy interesantes para nosotros. A ver. Creo que tengo algún problema de sonido. Lo haré muy breve para escuchar a Darja, que es quien realmente nos interesa. Simplemente es experta en temas de trabajo a domicilio, teletrabajo, y que ha realizado interesantísimos estudios sobre el impacto del teletrabajo en el Reino Unido durante esta época de COVID-19, de pandemia que aún estamos sufriendo. Como señalaba, la investigación se centra en estos temas, también relacionados con las empresas desarrollados desde casa, o sea, el autoempleo desde casa y otros temas. Actualmente proyectos sociales, económicos, en urbano, trabajo a domicilio, sobre todo de los trabajadores por cuenta, pero no solo. Está financiado dentro del programa europeo de todos. Como creo que se oye algo regular, voy a pasar ya a dar la palabra a la profesora Darja, que nos estará explicando, no sé, ella no entiende español, pero he hablado con ella que tiene alguna pregunta o alguna observación. Yo se la traduzco. Para facilitarme también la traducción, pues podéis hacer algún comentario un poco más. Ya podríamos usar el chat para eso. ¿De acuerdo? A ver, Simón, ¿me oyes? ¿O él me dice que no me oye? Julia, ¿no me oye bien?
Yo te oigo con muchísimo eco.
Con eco, vale, pues entonces vamos a pasar ya a comenzar con la conferencia. Voy a apagar yo mi micrófono. Espero que lo importante es la charla que nos va a dar nuestra colega británica, pues es correctamente. Ella va a utilizar compartir pantalla para la presentación que nos ha preparado. Espero que no haya ningún problema. Si hay algún problema, también podemos comunicarlo a través del chat. Darja, whenever you want, you can start whenever you want. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I shared now my full screen. So I hope you can see this all. So yeah, thank you very much, Maria, for inviting me and for organizing this seminar on homeworking. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to listen to the next two presentations. I have been studying homeworking for a while now, funded by the European Research Council with a starting grant, and I'm a geographer by background, and I have researched homeworking from very different perspectives, mainly urban research and economic geography. So in this presentation, I will focus on the consequences of homeworking for people, firms, and places. I will start with some background information just of homeworking across Europe, so data that we have on the prevalence of homeworking pre-COVID and now in the COVID situation, and I will then focus mainly on the United Kingdom, where I'm based and where I have analyze data. So my three foci will then be on consequences for people, firms, and places. So I will start with a map of homeworking and in 2018 in Europe. So these are data from Eurostat asking whether people have ever worked from home. So this is one indicator to measure how many jobs can potentially be done from home. What is so interesting about this map is this big geographical variety of the prevalence of homeworking pre-COVID-19. And we can see that in northern European countries. Unfortunately, that does not include Sweden, but you can see that the proportion of homeworking was much higher than in the rest of Europe, and we might speculate that this is also related to flexible working arrangements and gender policies. We also had high homeworking prevalence in the UK, in Iceland, in the Netherlands, and then very striking, you can see that in Southern Europe, particularly in Portugal, we had very low homeworking rates, and also in another study that's published in Urban Studies in 2002, we looked at the workplaces of people in cities, and here we controlled for industry composition, different occupational composition within countries, and still found that in Europe, people were less likely to work from home or in combination with working from an office, from employer's premises. So that's quite an interesting pattern, and I would like to hear more from you about possible explanations. And then also striking, what you can see is some very low homeworking prevalence, where we can assume it's related also to agriculture. So now, how does this map look now in the COVID-19 landscape? That graph is taken from a report by the European Commission, and they use data from Eurofound. Unfortunately, from an academic point of view, the data are not based on a random sample. So we may be a little bit careful in interpreting these findings. However, quite interesting, we can see that countries that had low prevalence of homeworking pre-COVID also had a very, or now has a lower homeworking rate amongst employees, whereas countries like Finland, Netherlands, which had one of the highest prevalence of homeworking pre-COVID, also has now, and we can see this in Finland and the Netherlands, more than really half of their employee workforce working from home. Unfortunately, the UK is not integrated in this survey anymore. So now I come back to the UK, where I did data analysis with Alan Feilstedt together, and we published a report, Homeworking in the UK Before and During the Lockdown 2020. And we were in this very good situation that we have very good, robust data. It's representative data. It's a very large data set, and it's part of a bigger household panel study, so that we are also able to link quite a lot of information to the respondents pre-COVID. So roughly 7,000 respondents provided information homework situation pre-COVID and then during COVID. So starting to the left, so the proportion of people who worked in January or February from home, always, often, or sometimes, we see that the proportion of those who always worked from home was relatively low, below 6%. And among home workers, mostly worked sometimes from home. So this will include, for example, the so-called teleworkers who, I mean, maybe 2/3 of their time work at the employer's premises and the remaining time from home. So we can see that I mean, roughly 1/3 of the working population, 16 years and older, worked at home in some capacity. This proportion is lower than on the map that I just showed you, which covered a little bit more whether people have ever worked from home. Yeah, so we always need to be careful now when we interpret findings, and because home working is not so homogeneous than some studies may suggest. So we have a big variety in who works from home and also how often. Now, if you look at April, and I have to explain to you that at the end of April, on the 23rd, the Prime Minister announced that we have to stay at home and only use the home for essential purposes, to go shopping. Everybody had to work from home if they could, and we were only allowed to go outside for an hour of exercise. So, and you can see this huge jump in those who always worked at home in April, rising from below 6% to 43%. So we have this big shift towards home working, but also among workers who sometimes worked from home to always working from home. So that was like a natural experiment, because it's now really enforced on people, whereas home working pre-COVID was mostly voluntary. So now we also have data for May and June, and you can see that proportion of those who always worked at home decreased a little bit. In mid-May, some of these very strict mitigation measures were relaxed, which is probably why we have seen already in May, and the survey was done last week of the month, which probably explains why home working already went down in May and then further in June. But the whole national lockdown, as we called it, which means those stay-at-home orders were in place across the UK and all its nation, really went on until the beginning of July. So this whole period covers really the very strict national lockdown. And who actually worked from home, which occupations before COVID-19 and then during the lockdown? Again, I show you here the figures for January, February, and then during the national lockdown with stay-at-home orders in place. And we can see that high skilled or higher skilled occupations have seen this huge increase in always working at home. We have seen this huge increase, particularly amongst the associate professionals, so not the very high skilled end or very high pay end, but more associate and administrative services. These jobs were really largely moved into homes. Then there are jobs that have a very low propensity to be done from home, and these are lower skilled and also lower paid jobs. So we have seen that the inequality in home working has really increased hugely through the COVID-19 crisis. And linked with the occupational pattern, we also have a very strong industry effect in home working. And here, if I start to the right-hand side of this slide, the highest prevalence of home working during the COVID-19 crisis is in banking and finance. So in this sector was really very little impacted so far by the crisis, very different to the 2007-2019 crisis that hit Spain so badly, but not only Spain, of course. So banking, finance, now in this crisis, very little affected because the sector could move their staff into homes. What we also can see that potential home working was, so this gap was really highest in banking and finance as well, because before COVID, most of these jobs, including administrative jobs, could be done from home, but they weren't. But now this huge increase, and also interesting in banking and finance, this high proportion of home working remained. Yeah. As we can see here in the bars, it even increased in June. And in comparison, the home working potential in distribution, hotels and restaurants is very, very low. And with this industry relationship with home working, we also see a very strong spatial or geographical variation in home working. The banking sector, finance sector is concentrated in London, and therefore we have now this very high home working rate in London, whereas before London didn't have a higher home working rate compared to other equal regions, regions that are not so mainly rural. So again, this home working gap, the potential of who could actually work from home and but did not, was really very pronounced in London. So in April, more than half of the workforce of London worked from home. The southeast is the area that is around London, and towards the south and east, and it's with London the most economically buoyant region. Here we also have very high home working rates, although not as high as London. And Wales is here an example for a more rural area with one of the lowest home working rates pre-COVID, but also then we have seen much lower home working rates during the COVID crisis. In relation to home working, gender has often been emphasized, and there are yeah, the literature has come up with slightly different conclusions about who's more likely to work from home. Uh, if we now look at the demographics and social characteristics of homework, what was so strong and striking is really this demographic shift of young people moving into homes. So here in this table, you can see 4 age groups, and in January and February, you can really see the older people were, the more likely they were working from home, with those in their 20s being relatively less likely to work from home. And they have this absolutely substantial increase in home working. June 2020, if you look, there is no really an age profile recognizable in home workers. And what we need to bear in mind if we now hear about the negative effects of home working, because this could be driven by the younger age group who's more likely to want to leave the home, to have social face-to-face relations with other people. The consequences for people. So pre-COVID, we have had in the literature really very different views about home working, and I wanted to summarize here some of the main positive and main negative associations that were done with home working. So on the positive side, it was seen as part of work-life balance, as part of a wider package of flexible working arrangements employers can offer their employees. Through home working, it was stressed that particularly women are more able to combine work and family, and this mainly was achieved to saving time, particularly saving time on long commutes, and it also enabled people to have a greater residential choice. So people, if they could commute less, could live further away from very dense, polluted residential inner city areas. From an economic point of view, there was made between working from home and job satisfaction and productivity. So it was found that those who could work from home if they want to, and if they have the housing that's amendable for home working, then home working rather made people more productive. And this was because people had fewer distractions from co-workers. People thought it was convenient to work from home, to just nip into the kitchen, make a cup of tea and go back to work. And people appreciated the of home working. And all these positive aspects, there are also associated negative aspects with it. So whereas we have this narrative of home working about work-life balance, people are able to combine work and family. Home working also increases work-family interferences and produces coalitions between the work sphere and the family sphere, and these interferences or overlapping is temporarily. So people, for example, due to ICT, even though it's family time, they can quickly check their email, so that work interferes in family time. But it's also spatial, so working in the same space as the family lives, so that family can very quickly interfere in the work sphere, through the child just going into the dedicated room that's dedicated for an office. But also people mention so mental interferences, this very quick switch people have to do. Now they are, for example, now I give a presentation, and then I leave my home office and my child might ask me something, but I'm still in my work mode and respond maybe more out the way there than I usually would speak with her. Or people complained about that they tend to be in their pajamas the whole day, which they felt were not the right, and therefore the home was not the right environment for them to be in. Even though it was particularly highlighted for women that home working facilitated the combination of work and family. On the other side, employees were afraid of being disadvantaged in promotions, so that management requires people to be present at the workplace, so that this was associated with ambition and dedication to the job. So people were afraid that they could be out of sight of management, and therefore they would be disadvantaged. So from an urban planning point of view, so there has been this discussion, is home working really saving the environment? Is it associated with fewer travel? And we have a few studies, and I have just today published a paper that shows that actually is associated with longer distance travel. We might need to think about the rebound effect and of home working. And then even though people, employees were more satisfied with their job when they worked from home, people often also felt they had to, that there is a work intensification for them, and they need to show more work effort to show their management, so I'm working hard. People complain that they felt that they are always on, even when they have leisure time. And on the other hand, home working is also associated in the literature, even pre-COVID, with social isolation and a lack of social relations. So these were mainly evidence of voluntary home working, and now we have this enforced home working situation, and a few things have changed, which we need to take into account if we want to really assess the consequences of home working on people. So there was this issue of interferences, and that people, it's called boundary management sociology, or human resource management, and this has increased because also kids are from home and the partner works from home. People have to combine homeschooling with work and childcare and family time. So now there are loads of interferences and spatially, mentally and temporarily happening in the home. And for many, the home might not be suitable for home working. So literature has shown that one important precondition for a very good work outcome of home working is that people have a dedicated home office. Also, due to the increase in online technology, since we all have to work from home, the home the home working situation is not so quiet and detached from the office working place anymore. For many, it's rather the feeling that they are constantly now in online meetings. There are the concerns about Zoom fatigue and etc. And also when there were these many stay-at-home orders in place, we could see an increase in so-called surveillance or software that employers were desperately buying. And I was quite surprised, just anecdotally, when our homeworking study was so widely cited. I was contacted from firms who actually offer this software, and they retrieve quite a lot of metadata from the server and everything, and they asked me whether we collaborate because they don't have the capacity to actually analyze the data. So yeah, I mean, huge changes now with enforced homeworking. We have investigated whether homeworking has a negative impact now on people's mental health. And our data was so good because we could link it to a previous study where the same people reported their mental health, and we could then compare their score pre-COVID with their score in April, May, and June. We used a general health questionnaire, the 36 score, and we could see slight difference between those who always worked at home, so in April, but not in June anymore. So hardly any differences in where people worked and their mental health compared to their pre-COVID situation. So this could mean two things: that those who saw their mental health deteriorating made sure they go back to their workplace very quickly in June, so that there is a slight positive bias in this. Or it could also mean that those who always worked from home really got accustomed to their new situation. So this needs for further analysis. Another study in Germany, for example, they didn't find any subjective well-being effect of home working now in the COVID-19 situation. Then we had the opportunity to feed questions on into this bigger survey that we used before for our analysis. So, and we asked people who worked at home in any capacity, whether it was always, often, or sometimes in June, please think about how much work you get done per hour these days. How does that compare to how much you would have get done per hour back in January, February 2020? And the largest proportion of home workers in our sample here, I show only the results for employees, that it was roughly the same, and then we have almost the same proportion of those who said they actually get more done to those who say they get done. So there is no obvious effect of home working on the self-assessed productivity of employees. And we further asked them about the home working preferences. So once social distancing measures are relaxed and workplaces go back to normal, how often would you like to work from home? And 9 out of 10 said they want to continue working at home in one capacity. which is a very high number if we remember how low the numbers were pre-COVID. Um, However, most of those who say they want to continue working from home have a preference for working sometimes at home. So 13% of those who want to continue working from home said they want to do this always. So it's a smaller proportion, but if you remember that at the beginning I showed you data that only 5.7%, but these were all workers, including the self-employed, could work from home always. It's really a huge increase, and actually broken down the figures pre-COVID, only 3% of employees could always work from home. So it is a huge increase of those who want to always work from home. Now, what are the consequences for firms, and how are they viewing the consequences of home working on their business? Here, the view from firms really matching our findings when we ask employees about their productivity. And I have seen this from other countries as well. There's one good study also from the US showing that the effect of firms it varies by industry, but is not massive. So here that's a business survey, UK wide, and here we see whether by industry firms have now more staff working from home, or they don't have more staff working from sure. So we see some predicted pattern that particularly information and communication and education and professional, scientific and technical sector has an increased number of staff working from home, but also manufacturing is quite is maybe higher than when we would expect. There are some sectors like transportation have not more staff working from home, or accommodation and food services that are very little amenable for home working. And now do the same firms see their productivity now with more or the same proportion of home workers? So we see to the left in this yellow green, it's that productivity has increased. The green as productivity has decreased, and this dark blue bar shows productivity has stayed the same. And if we look at the bottom, that's so the collapse measure for all industries, that just more than 10% think that productivity has increased. So roughly 10% see their productivity has decreased. And so the largest share hasn't seen a change. So this really almost mirrors our view from employees, how they have seen changes in their productivity. What's interesting, and that's relevant then for policy to bear in mind, that there is a big variation across industry. So there are some sectors where that really where the productivity decreased because of home working, whereas some sectors are less affected. So for example, administrative and support services, they were often not sure, but so a large proportion, productivity has stayed the same, and construction is also related because there is less working. But if you see information and communication, so it's the highest proportion productivity has stayed the same or even increased. Okay, now to the third topic. What does this now all mean for places? And our study, homeworking study, got very highly cited when the government forced people to go back to their offices. Now they have returned it, and they are supposed to work from home again. And interestingly, the main argument why the UK government started this campaign to encourage workers to go back to their offices was because central city places were empty, because office workers were those who could work from home, and therefore the city of London was empty, which then had this knock-on effect on all these small businesses or service chains that were catering for office workers. So if we look at where do home workers live pre-COVID, so I call them the old home workers, and we can see that first need to introduce you to this map. It's Great Britain. You can see the metropolitan areas circled in red, and London is zoomed in specifically, and you can see, so the more yellow the color is, the fewer people were working from home as proportion of the working residents population, and this is only amongst employees, and the darker the color, the higher the proportion of employees who worked from home. And you can see that the proportions were lowest in metropolitan areas, and then we had higher proportions, particularly in rural areas in Scotland, and you can see so higher proportions in the around London. This will be still the commuter belt, and around some metropolitan area you see an increase where you can see these will so home working has here really extended the commuting distance. And within metropolitan areas, and here I picked Manchester. Here, this map shows the location quotient of employees who work from home, and this compares their residences with employees all together where they live, and you can see that home working employees have this tendency to live in outer areas within metropolitan areas as well, and they didn't live in the central parts, which is also due because of the spatial variation of residential areas, because it was often not possible to live in central residential areas because there was few affordable housing available. And if we now look, coming back to this European, the report of the European Commission, where do new home workers live, we can see this stark increase in home work in cities and suburbs, which is not surprising because here pre-COVID we had these lower proportions in these areas, but particularly in well-off suburbs, we can imagine that higher skilled and higher paid workers live. So there is this biggest gap between potential for working from home and not having worked from home pre-COVID-19. And we can see now in the UK, this is an example for pret-a-manger. It's so yeah, takeaway, but also sit in cafe, and they only went into high street, really the highest, I mean the most expensive locations in cities, in commercial areas, and they had very a lot of cafes, for example, in the city of London, and they are now thinking of expanding their business to the suburbs, because this is now where home workers live. And I also came across an article where pret-a-manger was thinking loudly about to pop up coffee shops, for example, in the suburbs. Now to round up, what is this likely to mean for the future? So our own study has shown that there is a high preference amongst workers for so-called teleworking. So it's not exclusively working from home, but working sometimes from home. So having this change between the office and the home working environment, maybe doing also different kinds of work. So reserving a day where you have more head work and you do this then from home. This would then mean for cities that they need to think about their transport and infrastructure to provide this very good infrastructure to connect suburbs with the city, but also it means if companies can incorporate teleworking more in the future, then they also potentially need fewer office spaces. So we could think about really restructuring our center, the city centers. It also means for residential areas that there is this increasing demand for very high amenities. Residential areas in the suburbs, really not the mono-functional suburbs, but the suburbs where more people can actually work and have high amenities like nice coffee shops or and other shops close by. Whereas pre-COVID people would have trip chains where they then worked, and on the way back from work to home they could go shopping, and these trip changing, that is likely to change if home working is here to stay. So from various evidence that is already collected, we have not seen really a very strong adverse effect on productivity through home working in industries with high shares of high skilled and high paid workers. There are big industry effects here, of course. And if we allow employees to work from home, our own findings would not suggest that this then ultimately would reduce productivity. And there is evidence from pre-COVID that also shows that if home working is voluntary, if people have the space to work from home and can also contain the interference with family, then it can increase the productivity. And also to combat the social isolation that has been connected with home working, this then links back to town planning, how suburbs could be designed so that people have maybe co-working spaces close by. Okay, so thank you very much. So I included here links to our publications and also my email address if you want to follow up. Okay, so that was me. And I guess back to you, Maria.
Yes.
And I should stop sharing my slides now.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, I think that I have some problems with my microphone. So thank you very much. And please, por favor, si tenéis alguna pregunta, podemos hacerla a través del chat. Apago mi micro. O podéis hacer la pregunta en directo y quizá puede apagar su micro. A ver, de acuerdo, ¿quieres hacer alguna pregunta?
Hola. Hola.
Julia, como quieras, en directo o por el chat, como quieras. Julia, primero, después
Vale. Claro
y
que no.
después Carmen.
Vale.
Carmen había pedido la palabra primero.
¿Quién? ¿Carmen Tatay?
No,
Vale,
Carmen
pues.
Sornosa.
Bueno,
No sé
venga.
si alguien más.
Carmen Sornosa, va, la primera.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very, very interesting for me. I have a doubt about the data. You have a lot of information about where the people is working, and I would like to know how do you get all those data?
Yeah, I mean, I could share more information with you about these various different data sources. So, I mean, I particularly in my research, so this is what I mainly do, searching for good data sources, secondary data sources, and then I mainly work quantitatively, but not exclusively. And the European data is for Eurostat, so it's really available to everybody on the Eurostat website. And for the UK, we use the Understanding Society, which is the household panel survey. It's quite large, and it's open for also international researchers outside the UK. I mean, so in the reports that I included as links, so there's more information directly on the data, and I could maybe we could maybe follow up if you have more questions. But for the UK, it's mainly the Understanding Society, and then I use some of our census data about the location of old home workers and new home workers. So this is from the census, which included the question where people work, and then people could take that they don't have a workplace outside their home, but they work from home. So I use that data. So it's now unfortunately it seems quite old because from 2011, but I don't think that this will have changed massively. I mean, COVID has changed everything, but I don't think COVID in 2019, the geography will have been different to 2011.
Thank you, Darja. Can you see the chat?
There's one question here in the chat. Maybe I could read it out loud. Sorry. It's a very good question. According to your results, the new geography of teleworking is an urban geography. Yeah, it's more urban. So because there was this higher gap between those who could potentially work from home and but did not work from home, so which is also linked to higher scale jobs. So that's right. We have seen more increase in urban areas. Is it an opportunity for rural areas? I think so. This is more anecdotal, however. I mean, going back pre-COVID, particularly for the UK, there has been a long discussion about people wanting to move out from urban areas, and that then ICT also enables this, yeah, teleworking or maybe becoming self-employed. So the electronic cottage, it has not really become a big phenomenon. We have seen this a little bit in the UK, particularly in London, because London is so highly polluted, is very, very expensive. So often London is so used as a so-called escalator, that people earn a lot of money for 10 years and then move out. And this is probably now an opportunity for rural areas if they have the technology provided, the infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, people need now good internet connection. And anecdotally from newspapers, I have seen this trend that some people now move out of cities. They want to live in a more healthier environment, now healthy also, meaning less dense. This is particularly relevant to follow up. Shall I just, there's another question.
Okay. A minute, because Carmen Carmen.
Congratulations, Darja. But I need Simón o Pilar Guitars para preguntarle, sí, cuando habla de home working, ¿vale? El trabajo en casa, diferencia o ha diferenciado entre quienes trabajan para sí, por cuenta propia, o trabajan para otros, por cuenta ajena, para empresarios ajenos, o sea, para otros, o para sí mismos, por cuenta propia. Cuando da las estadísticas y las tablas que ha hecho, los gráficos, que no he podido seguirla y entenderla de todo, pero las gráficas me han resultado muy útiles, por eso la felicito. Pero quería esa pregunta en cuanto a los datos, si ella ha diferenciado en el trabajo en casa entre el que trabaja en casa porque es autónomo, porque va por su cuenta, o el que trabaja en casa porque tiene un empresario al que responder. Eso, si se lo podéis traducir.
Yes, okay, I will translate this. Darja, first of all, please turn off the microphone when someone takes the floor because we cannot listen very clearly. Okay? Okay. So the question of Carmen is that in your research, in the survey, you have you differentiate between those workers for themselves and those workers for someone else? I mean, for a firm? And I think so. You did. The different. Okay, but the microphone.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, in the survey, have you differentiate, make a difference between those workers working for themselves, self-workers, and the rest workers for others? I think you did.
Yes. Actually, my main interest is in self-employment. So in because pre-COVID, I mean, a lot of self-employed worked from home, so for them it was not new. It was this radical change um, amongst employees. For the productivity data, we did not investigate by employees and the self-employed, because there is this big issue of the self-employed that they didn't have any work. So I mean, even if they were still self-employed, I looked at the statistics. I mean, there is this huge drop in their working hours, and I mean, so many didn't have any work, so that therefore they couldn't really answer the productivity question. So we have particularly looked at this mental health by employees and the self-employed. This might be another issue. So,
Thank you, Darja. Carmen, en resumen, ¿lo has entendido? O en resumen, ¿te comento? Carmen, no te escuchamos. Bueno, hago una pequeña
No sé si
traducción.
al final he resumido que lo importante era trabajar en casa, da igual que para sí mismo que para otros. No, justo lo contrario.
No. Que en su investigación, que en el survey en la encuesta que han hecho, sí que diferencian, ¿de acuerdo? El problema y que para los que tienen autoempleo, el trabajo en casa era muy habitual, ya era conocido anteriormente y por tanto ahora ha subido más, pero ya era un elemento importante. Para los que trabajan para otros, el problema, entre comillas, es que los que han quedado en paro, han quedado sin trabajo o en ERTE, no han contestado la encuesta.
Vale.
Solo han contestado la encuesta los que efectivamente trabajaban. Pero que el tema de conocer cómo ha afectado, sobre todo en el tema del autoempleo, les resulta muy interesante y que lo quieren entrar porque este tema es su especialidad.
Vale, gracias.
Vale. Creo que no se me olvida nada. Si alguien ha visto algo más, vale, pues Darja, you also have some other questions in the chat.
Yeah, so there's one question from Raphael who asked about this link I made to co-working and what does this then means for cities. So so in various research I did, so often we found that co-working spaces, these are flexible office spaces where people could rent flexibly an office, but it also comes with a social add-on. So, so that a lot of co-working spaces want to fulfill the purpose of connecting people and combating the social isolation in the home. So, and these spaces are concentrated in central cities, so they will have been quite hard hit by the crisis as well, even though I haven't seen any any report on this, not even anecdotal evidence. And I have argued for a while that co-working spaces, not only these very glossy commercialized co-working spaces, but also smaller ones, and we have examples from local communities supporting that workers can come together because they work mainly from home. Professional relationships, and that really local communities can support this. And I mean, now with social distancing measures in place, post-COVID, with home working and teleworking staying, this would be really something I would have thought urban planning could think about.
Thank you. Simón, ¿quieres?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Darja, for your presentation. It was great. Just one question, because you have presented a list or a ranking with the sectors, with the activities and the productivity gains. And I wondered if the reasons for the spending reasons for these productivity gains is just the skills of the workers, or there may be another factors behind. For example, I don't know, the technical equipment, or maybe the very nature of the activities that sectors carry out, or maybe legal regulations. Have you explored these other factors apart from the skills? Thank you very much.
Yeah, in a very recent research, just one example, we interviewed self-employed workers, how they did during the crisis. And for example, one was a mobile therapist, and so her work really dropped massively. I mean, she didn't have any work when the full lockdown was in place, because all her clients would cancel the visits. And then she set up a therapist room in her own home. I mean, obviously she had the space to do that. And now clients, and she cleans after every client, she cleans this room, and so can comply with the new COVID regulations. So she said it because we could see this higher productivity also in construction, manufacturing, that this might be a similar effect as well. So this is all anecdotal. So I mean, clearly we need to do more research to understand what's actually happening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Rosa, ¿quieres hacer alguna pregunta? Cuando quieras.
Sí, por favor. Thank you very much for your presentation, Darja, and all your work. I would like to ask you regarding. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, perfect. Because there are some logistic problems. My question is about small businesses, and in particular retail and hospitality sector, taking into account the structure, the economic structure of Spain, that is quite different regarding the UK, and taking into account also the fact that you have so much knowledge about the whole Europe and the different countries. I know it's a difficult question, but even like this, I would like to ask you if you could suggest, or could you say any political proposals regarding this sector, because as you know, Spain is based on retail and hospitality sector. So we have a big problem to face this digital process. And it's not only the health dimension, also after that, how we are going to reinvent, rebuild all the whole model of our society, briefly. So as you have much more experience as a British, at least from coming from the UK, and all your knowledge, perhaps you could say some ideas or suggest some examples about other countries that are before us, of course, in front of us, of course. Thank you.
That's a very tricky question. I mean, what we have seen is, so particularly the around self-employment and businesses, that the crisis has also enabled some people to be innovative and come up with new business models, and this perhaps around innovative ways also for catering. That's not so much the hotel and accommodation, but also how to food provision and food delivery. So we have seen some new models here. In terms of accommodation, that's rather anecdotal, but also thinking, I mean, there are ways of ensuring social distancing and accommodation, smaller units, for example. But again, the viability, I mean, it is a very difficult sector. I mean, I cannot provide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Darja. Really a difficult question because it's, I mean, it's the whole structure of a country who has to change because we are very dependent on tourism, for example. Well, anyway, ¿alguna otra cuestión? Any other question? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Darja. It has been a pleasure to have you here with us. And now I have to say you bye, or see you later, maybe someday in the future. I hope we can keep contact and collaborate maybe in the future, because I'm going to introduce the two other conferences. Okay, so I'll change now. I will speak Spanish now. Bye, Darja. Muchas gracias, Darja. Ella se tiene que marchar.